Hello my friends. As always, this is Jassie and Techno Geek Brains with news from the world of gadgets, technology, and science. Today's episode. Apple loses attempt to halt Apple Watch sales ban. Masimo management are expressing a willingness to negotiate in an attempt to address the reason for blocking Apple Watch sales in the US. PlayStation 5 sales exceeded 50 million units, it almost overtook the PS4 in terms of distribution rate. Sony prepares to lose $1.5 billion by 2027 due to Activision Blizzard's merger with Microsoft. Waymo has 7.1 million driverless miles. How does its driving compare to humans? Okay, let's go. Apple has lost its bid to delay an import and sales ban on the Watch Series 9 and Watch Ultra 2. In a filing on Wednesday, the U.S. International Trade Commission, ITC, denied Apple's motion to stay the ban while awaiting an appeal. On Monday, Apple announced its plans to pull the Watch Series 9 and Ultra 2 from store shelves in response to an October ruling from the ITC, which said the company's SpO2 sensors infringed on patents from medical device maker Masimo. The last day to purchase the Watch Series 9 and Ultra 2 from Apple stores is December 24th, while the import ban officially goes into effect on December 26th. Apple is already exploring ways it can avoid the ban, including by implementing software changes, according to Bloomberg. For the reasons discussed in the Commission opinion issued concurrently herewith, the Commission has determined to deny Apple's motion to stay the remedial orders pending appeal and or in light of a potential government shutdown. The ITC's filing reads, the ban is only in effect in the US, and third-party retailers such as Best Buy will still be able to sell the pair of watches until their supplies run out. Although Apple's attempt to stop the ban has failed, it still has a chance to undo the decision if President Joe Biden vetoes it. However, as my colleague Victoria Song points out, Apple getting a presidential veto would be like lightning striking the same place twice. In the meantime, Masimo management are expressing a willingness to negotiate in an attempt to address the reason for blocking Apple Watch sales in the USA. CEO of Masimo, Joe Chiani, in an interview with Bloomberg TV channel explained that his company is ready to negotiate with Apple on a payoff, but on the condition of finalizing the disputed products of the second of the companies under the control of the right holder. Now, as the head of Masimo explained, Apple is not in contact, and the tango requires two partners. The last time a dialogue between Apple representatives and Masimo management took place in 2013, according to Joe Chiani, when the Californian iPhone developer was trying to either poach the head of Masimo or take over the company in order to gain access to technologies of interest to him. If Apple and Masimo go for a settlement, this, according to the head of the latter, will be preceded by a frank dialogue and apology. Right now, Apple representatives only state that they consider the decision of the U.S. International Trade Commission to be erroneous and will appeal it. According to the head of Masimo, earlier Apple poached more than 20 engineers from the former company, doubling their salaries in some cases to create a technology to measure the oxygen content in the blood of the watch user, similar to the one invented by Masimo. Apple considers Masimo's smartwatches to be a copy of its own products and calls the complaint to the ITC part of a plan to free up a market niche for the brand's devices. The head of Masimo also admitted that if Apple had produced smartwatches and their components in the US, the ban on their sale could not come into force. Masimo itself manufactures its own products in the United States. PlayStation 5 sales exceeded 50 million units, it almost overtook the PS4 in terms of distribution rate. PlayStation 5 sales have reached a milestone. Sony announced Wednesday that more than 50 million PS5 game consoles have been sold since shipments began in late 2020. Between July and December 2023 alone, Sony managed to ship 10 million PS5 consoles. Experts attribute such a surge in sales during the second half of this year to the increased availability of the PS5 after supply chain issues and shortages were resolved. Data from analytics firm Ampere Analysis shows that PlayStation sales rose 65% to 22.5 million units this year, outpacing Switch and Xbox sales, which fell 18% and 15% respectively. That suggests Sony is on track to meet its goal of 25 million consoles shipped annually by March 2024. We are grateful to all of our players who have joined the PS5 journey, and we are thrilled that this is the first holiday season since launch when we have a full stock of PS5 consoles so everyone can buy one, said Sony Interactive Entertainment President and CEO Jim Ryan. The PS5 failed to surpass the record for fastest sales set earlier by the PS4 video game console, which took a week less to break the 50 million consoles sold mark. But if we take into account serious problems with the supply of components in 2022, we can assume that under favorable circumstances the leaders would still be PS5. Sony prepares to lose $1.5 billion by 2027 due to Activision Blizzard's merger with Microsoft. The takeover of the largest game publisher Activision Blizzard King by Microsoft Corporation will give the latter an advantage over Sony in the console market. The Japanese giant sees this as a serious threat to its console and subscription sector. The company is looking to create the perfect game subscription. Microsoft had to overcome fierce resistance to pull off the Activision Blizzard King takeover. It wasn't just regulators who were concerned, but also Sony, who became a fierce opponent of the deal. In pursuit of its goal, Microsoft had to commit to keeping PlayStation access to Call of Duty for the next 10 years. That commitment has satisfied every regulatory body except the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, FTC, and documents leaked to the web as a result of the Insomniac hack show that Sony remains deeply concerned. It sees the takeover as a serious threat and believes Microsoft has been given the opportunity to overtake it in the console market. Microsoft's takeover of Activision will allow it to leapfrog our current fundamentals. Activision provides incredible strategic value in game services and is scaling into the mobile and PC markets. Battle.net reads one of the slides from a presentation to Sony employees. The presentation notes Microsoft's ambition to create its own mobile game store to compete with Apple and Google's platforms. The company does plan to open such a platform in 2024, but its success will depend on whether regulators force Apple and Google to open up their ecosystems sufficiently. According to Sony's pessimistic prediction, complications over Call of Duty will begin as early as 2027, well before the 10-year deadline. Microsoft has pledged to keep PlayStation access to the franchise, but it has not promised that the games will be released on all consoles at the same time. Activision's new titles may appear in Game Pass on release day, and Microsoft will take advantage of this period of exclusivity to increase its dominance in the subscription segment. Sony experts point out that the competitor's actions pose a huge threat to its PlayStation Plus subscription service, which could turn into a $1.5 billion loss by 2027. In other words, PlayStation's dominance has created a state of complacency in Sony. But now the company feels threatened. Now there's an urgent need for Sony to expand its offerings. The company is trying to find the perfect game subscription model. Game fans expect best-in-class offerings for a monthly fee, but Sony considers such a model unsustainable because it sees no way to recoup its investment in premium games for subscribers. In addition, PlayStation, unlike Xbox, doesn't have a unified interface across mobile, PC, and consoles, and the company has only one way to compensate for this shortcoming: a premium sales model. It can only provide the status quo, and Sony is no longer convinced that's enough. Waymo has 7.1 million driverless miles. How does its driving compare to humans? The Google spin-off's Robot Access led to a reduction in injury-related and police-reported crashes when compared to human benchmarks, according to new research. For years, Waymo has been claiming that its driverless vehicles have the potential to be safer than humans. Now the company says it has the data to back it up. Waymo analyzed 7.13 million fully driverless miles in 3 cities, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and compared the data to human driving benchmarks to determine whether its cars were involved in fewer injury-causing and police-reported crashes. And it was the first time the company studied miles from fully driverless operations only, rather than a mix of autonomous and human-monitored driving. The conclusion? Waymo's driverless cars were 6.7 times less likely than human drivers to be involved in a crash resulting in an injury, or an 85% reduction over the human benchmark, and 2.3 times less likely to be in a police-reported crash, or a 57% reduction. That translates to an estimated 17 fewer injuries and 20 fewer police-reported crashes compared to if a human driver would have driven the same distance in the cities where Waymo operates. Waymo's analysis comes at a fraught moment for autonomous vehicles. The company's main competitor, Cruise, has paused operations nationwide after a crash in San Francisco resulted in a pedestrian being dragged 20 feet by one of the company's driverless cars. Cruise allegedly withheld video footage of the incident from regulators and is now facing up to $1.5 million in fines from the state. Lawmakers and labor advocates are calling for a crackdown on autonomous vehicles, regardless of company ownership. But Waymo said the timing of the release of its safety analysis, coming at a time when its main rival is facing its worst crisis in years, is just a coincidence. Still, Waymo's director of safety research and best practices Trent Victor said the data can help the public understand that not every company developing autonomous vehicles is the same. What we'd like to do is give a clearer picture to allow the people to see the difference between Waymo and other AV companies, Victor said in a briefing with reporters. Another difference is we are scaling responsibly. The company is using public data to form its conclusions, inviting other, third-party researchers to replicate its results. Waymo and other AV operators are required to report every crash to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration as part of the agency's efforts to shine a light on self-driving cars in the U.S. Waymo's millions of miles were not totally incident-free. The company said that in total, over the entire 7 million plus miles in all 3 cities, its vehicles were only involved in 3 crashes that resulted in injuries, 2 in Phoenix and 1 in San Francisco. All 3 injuries were minor, according to Christopher Cassano, safety researcher at Waymo and a co-author of the study. Still, that's significantly less than the crash rate for human drivers. Another way of looking at it is to look at the crash rate per million miles of driving. The human benchmark is 2.78 incidents per million miles. Waymo's benchmark for its driverless vehicles was only 0.41. One of the biggest challenges for Waymo was controlling for various factors when comparing its vehicles to human drivers. In order to present a fair comparison, Waymo needed to address statistical biases in the data, such as human drivers failing to report minor crashes, or differences in driving conditions. For example, Waymo's vehicles operate in geofenced areas in the 3 cities where they drive, which excludes highways. Human drivers don't avoid these types of roads. Human drivers also tend not to report certain low-level crashes, like minor fender benders. In contrast, Waymo is legally required to report every contact event with another vehicle, no matter how minor. As a result, Waymo needed to adjust its model to account for those factors. Waymo's analysis included underreporting adjustments for police-reported crashes or were derived from naturalistic driving study databases, the company said, citing a literature review of 12 past studies and 1 book comparing AV and human crash rates. The goal was to say, here's what the human crash population would have looked like if it had driven under similar conditions as what the automated vehicle did, said John Scanlon, safety researcher at Waymo and co-author of the study. The analysis comes on the heels of a study that Waymo published in conjunction with Swiss Re that found that the company's driverless vehicles reduced the frequency of bodily injury claims by 100%, compared to Swiss Re's human baseline of 1.11 claims per million miles. The current state of the self-driving car industry is very unsettled. AVs are operating in a small handful of cities, but many people say they are skeptical of the technology and wouldn't necessarily trust it over their own driving. The negative attention around the Cruise incident, as well as the recent recall of Tesla's autopilot, are just the latest in a series of bad headlines that have led many to conclude that self-driving cars are a fad, or even worse, more dangerous than human drivers. Waymo has gone further than other AV companies in the use of data and statistical analysis to make the safety case for autonomous vehicles. Waymo insists that driverless cars are necessary as an antidote to the crisis of traffic fatalities, of which there are around 40,000 a year in the US. The company often points out that driverless cars never get drunk, tired, or distracted and are able to avoid the human errors that so often lead to crashes and deaths. Last year, the company produced 2 scientific papers comparing autonomous vehicle performance to human driving. The first analyzed response times when a crash is imminent, while the other presented a novel methodology to evaluate how well autonomous driving systems avoid crashes. Waymo has also sought to measure the safety of its AVs by simulating dozens of real-world fatal crashes that took place in Arizona over nearly a decade. The Google spin-off discovered that replacing either vehicle in a 2-car collision with its robot-guided vehicles would nearly eliminate all deaths. It is an inarguable fact that there are far fewer AVs on the road than human-driven vehicles and, thus, less data from which to draw conclusions. Humans drive close to 100 million miles between fatal crashes. Some experts assert that we'll need hundreds of millions of miles from autonomous vehicles before we can start to make more meaningful comparisons about safety. But Waymo's efforts seem like a step in the right direction. These reports represent a good faith effort by Waymo to evaluate how the safety of its autonomous driving system compares with the safety of human driving, said David Zuby, Chief Research Officer of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. The results are encouraging and represent one step in our evolving understanding of ADS safety. Other researchers agree. This provides the strongest evidence I've seen yet that ADS have lower crash rates than humans. Carol Flanagan, a researcher at the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. I think the more complicated question is what this means in the broader journey to determining when ADS are safer than humans. This is the end of this episode. Put your thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and you won't miss new videos. Bye bye.